Elizabeth Taylor stopped breathing. Doctors had minutes to decide: cut into her throat to save her life, or watch the most famous woman on earth die in front of them. They chose the knife. One incision through her windpipe. Blood, oxygen, a tube forced into her airway. She survived. But in that moment something else was dying. Not a woman, a studio. Because while Elizabeth Taylor fought for her life in a London hospital room, 20th Century Fox was fighting for survival in a conference room 3,000 miles away. And the weapon they needed wasn't a scalpel. It was a contract clause. This is the night one scar saved Hollywood. 18 months earlier, Fox executives thought they had made a brilliant move. They would resurrect Cleopatra, the story of Egypt's most powerful queen, and cast Elizabeth Taylor in the lead role. The budget was set at $2 million, modest by studio standards. Filming would take 12 weeks in England. Everything was planned. Everything was controlled. Everything was wrong. By September 1960, when production began outside London, the budget had already doubled. The script wasn't finished. Director Ruben Mamoulian was clashing with producers. Sets built in the English countryside stood half-completed, as rain turned the ground into mud. And Elizabeth Taylor hadn't even arrived yet. When she finally came to England in October, the problems multiplied. The weather was brutal. Cold rain fell constantly. Fog made outdoor filming impossible. Crew members stood around for hours doing nothing, while Fox's accountants watched money disappear into the gray British sky. Every day that cameras didn't roll cost the studio $50,000. In 1960, that was the price of a luxury home. Fox was burning houses, and they hadn't shot a single usable scene. Elizabeth's contract contained a clause that would haunt Fox for years. She received $125,000 up front, plus 10% of gross profits. Extraordinary for the time. But there was more. For every week production ran over schedule, she earned $50,000 in overtime. The studio had built a trap for itself. Delays meant Elizabeth got richer while Fox got poorer. And the delays were about to become catastrophic. By December, Elizabeth had worked only 16 days. In 2 months. The rest of the time she waited in her hotel suite while rain fell, and scripts were rewritten, and directors argued with producers. Mamoulian quit. Joseph Mankiewicz took over. The script was scrapped and started again. Sets were torn down and rebuilt. Money vanished. And then in late February 1961, Elizabeth caught what she thought was a cold. She felt tired. That was normal. The production exhausted everyone. But the tiredness wouldn't leave. Her throat hurt. Her lungs felt heavy. The studio doctor examined her and prescribed rest. She stayed in bed for 3 days. The cold got worse. By March 2nd, Elizabeth could barely breathe. Her personal physician, Dr. Carl Goldman, was called urgently. One look at her condition and he knew this wasn't a cold. It was Malta fever, a bacterial infection she had contracted years earlier during the filming of Elephant Walk. The disease had gone dormant. Now it was back. Combined with bronchitis and the cold English weather, it was killing her. Dr. Goldman ordered immediate hospitalization. Elizabeth was rushed to the London clinic in the middle of the night. Photographers gathered outside within the hour. News traveled fast when Elizabeth Taylor was involved. But inside the hospital, the situation was far worse than anyone knew. Her lungs were filling with fluid. Pneumonia was setting in rapidly. Oxygen levels dropped. Her breathing became shallow, labored, desperate. Nurses monitored her constantly. Dr. Goldman stayed by her side. And in Hollywood, 3,000 miles away, Fox executives received a phone call that would define the studio's future. Inside Fox headquarters, chaos erupted. Not grief, calculation. Because while Elizabeth's life hung by a thread, the studio's financial survival hung by a contract. If she died, the insurance situation became a legal nightmare. Fox had insured the production, yes, but the policy contained specific clauses. Death of the star would trigger some payouts, but not all costs would be covered. The money already spent on sets, costumes, crew salaries, and countless delays. Much of that would never return. The studio had burned through over $7 million. In 1961, that was enough to fund 10 major films, and they had nothing to show for it. No finished scenes, no usable footage, nothing. Worse, Elizabeth Taylor couldn't be replaced. Her contract was unique. She wasn't just an actress hired for a role. She was Cleopatra. The film had been sold to distributors and theaters on her name alone. Posters already featured her face. Marketing campaigns were built around her image. Without Elizabeth, the film wasn't just delayed, it was dead, and Fox couldn't afford to bury it. The studio was already in financial trouble. Other films had underperformed. Stockholders were restless. Cleopatra was supposed to save them. Instead, it was destroying them. In the boardroom, lawyers examined insurance documents with terrifying precision. What if Elizabeth died during production? What if she died after production restarted but before filming finished? What if she survived but couldn't work for months? Each scenario opened new legal and financial abysses, and none of the scenarios ended well for Fox. The executives realized something horrifying. Their entire future depended on one woman's heartbeat, a heartbeat that was growing weaker by the hour. March 4, 1961. Early morning. Inside the London clinic, Elizabeth Taylor's condition deteriorated rapidly. Her oxygen levels were critical. She was unconscious. Her lungs couldn't process air. Dr. Goldman conferred urgently with Dr. Terence Cawthorne, a leading throat surgeon. They had one option left: emergency tracheotomy. The procedure was brutal in its simplicity. Cut a hole in the windpipe below the obstruction. Insert a tube. Force oxygen directly into the lungs. It was a last resort, and if it failed, Elizabeth would die within minutes. Dr. Cawthorne prepared his instruments: scalpel, clamp, tube, sutures. The room was silent except for the failing rhythm of Elizabeth's breathing. Nurses stood ready. Dr. Goldman held her hand. The surgeon made the first cut. Through skin, through muscle, through cartilage. Blood welled immediately. He worked quickly, methodically, without hesitation. One wrong move and the patient dies. The windpipe was exposed. He made the critical incision. The hole opened. Air rushed in. He inserted the tube, secured it. Oxygen flowed directly into her lungs. Her body convulsed once, then stabilized. Elizabeth Taylor was breathing again. The surgery had worked, but the scar it left would last forever. A small hole in her throat, just above the collarbone. Visible, permanent. A mark that would appear in photographs for the rest of her life. The scar that saved her, and unknowingly saved a studio. Elizabeth survived the surgery, but Dr. Cawthorne delivered devastating news to the studio. She could not continue filming in England. The cold weather would kill her. Her lungs were too damaged. Recovery would take months, and even after recovery, working in London's climate would risk pneumonia again. His medical verdict was absolute. If Fox wanted Elizabeth Taylor, they had one option: move the entire production to somewhere warm, somewhere dry, somewhere that wouldn't murder their star. Fox executives received this news like a death sentence, because moving production meant abandoning everything built in England. Every set, every costume constructed for the English climate, every contract with British crew members. Millions of dollars already spent would be erased. The London Cleopatra would be dismantled and left to rot, and rebuilding somewhere else would cost even more millions. The studio was trapped. Walking away meant total loss. They had invested too much to quit. Their only path was forward, into an even deeper financial nightmare. The location scouts were sent out immediately. Where in the world could they build ancient Egypt in 1961? Where was the weather reliable, the infrastructure capable, the government cooperative? Spain was considered too bureaucratic. Greece was discussed, too remote. And then someone suggested Rome. Italy had Cinecittà Studios, one of Europe's largest production facilities. The weather was Mediterranean. The government welcomed Hollywood money. Rome had history, architecture, craftsmen who understood ancient aesthetics. It was perfect, except for one detail. It would be the most expensive decision Fox could possibly make. By April 1961, the orders came down. Dismantle London, move to Rome, start over. What happened next was a financial massacre that would define Fox's existence for years. The English sets, which had cost over $2 million to build, were torn apart and abandoned. Thousands of costumes, each handcrafted by British artisans, were packed into crates or simply discarded. Furniture, props, equipment, contracts with local crews, rental agreements for facilities, all of it written off as total loss. In Rome, construction teams worked around the clock building an entire ancient city on the Cinecittà backlot. The Forum, the Palace, the Sphinx, Alexandria's harbor. Massive structures that consumed lumber, steel, paint, labor, and cash at a rate that made accountants physically ill. Meanwhile, Fox's other projects began dying quietly. Films in development were canceled to free up production funds. Actors under studio contracts were released early. Scheduled releases were delayed or scrapped entirely. The marketing department saw its budget slashed. Fox was no longer a diversified studio making multiple films. It had become a single film company, and that single film was Cleopatra. Every department, every dollar, every decision now served one purpose: keep Cleopatra alive, because if Cleopatra failed, Fox had nothing left. By July, Elizabeth was medically cleared to travel. She flew to Rome with her entourage. Eddie Fisher, her husband at the time, came with her. Her children, her assistants, her hairdresser, her makeup artist, her personal physician. The studio paid for everything, because they had no choice. The contract guaranteed it. And finally, after nearly a year of disasters, filming began again, in Rome, in summer heat, with a new director, a new script, a new set, and a budget that had exploded from $2 million to over $15 million. As production continued in Rome, Fox's financial situation became critical. The studio's president, Spyro Skouras, faced growing pressure from stockholders and board members. How could one film consume so much money? How could delays be so endless? How could Elizabeth Taylor's salary keep rising while the studio bled cash? Skouras defended the production publicly. Privately, he was terrified. Fox had become hostage to its own investment. Walking away meant losing everything already spent. Continuing meant risking everything still owned. There was no safe choice, only varying degrees of catastrophe. In December 1961, Fox made a desperate decision. They would sell part of their most valuable asset, the studio's backlot in West Los Angeles, hundreds of acres where countless classic films had been shot. Streets, buildings, sets, history, all of it would be sold to real estate developers. The land would become Century City, a massive complex of office towers and luxury apartments. The sale would bring in desperately needed cash, but it also meant erasing Hollywood's past to survive its present. Fox was selling its soul to pay for Cleopatra, and still the production dragged on. Mankiewicz rewrote scenes daily. Elizabeth's health fluctuated. New problems emerged constantly. The Rome sets flooded during a rainstorm. Costumes were damaged. Equipment broke. And then, in January 1962, something unexpected happened that would add another layer of chaos Fox could no longer afford to control. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, who played Mark Antony, began a love affair, on set, in front of everyone, while both were married to other people. When news of the Taylor-Burton affair leaked, Fox executives faced a new crisis. More scandal, more media attention, more complications, but this time they had no power to stop it. Elizabeth's contract protected her from morality clauses. Burton couldn't be replaced without reshooting months of footage. The affair was happening, and Fox was powerless. They could fire the lovers and lose everything already filmed, or they could accept it and hope the damage could be managed. They chose acceptance, not because they wanted to, because they had no choice left. What Fox didn't anticipate was the public reaction. Newspapers ran daily stories. Paparazzi swarmed Rome. Photographers camped outside Elizabeth's villa. Every detail of the forbidden romance became international news. The Vatican condemned the relationship. Politicians gave speeches about moral decay. Religious leaders called for boycotts. And through it all, something strange happened. People who had never cared about Cleopatra suddenly wanted to see the film. The scandal wasn't destroying the movie. It was marketing it. Fox's publicity department realized they had stumbled into free advertising they could never have purchased. The studio shifted strategy quietly. They didn't encourage the affair, but they stopped trying to hide it. Press visits to the set increased. Photographers were given calculated access. Elizabeth and Richard's on-screen chemistry became inseparable from their off-screen romance in the public mind. The film was no longer just about ancient Egypt. It was about forbidden love in modern Rome, and audiences were desperate to witness it. By mid-1962, Cleopatra had become the most anticipated film in the world. Not because of its budget, not because of its sets, because Fox had lost control, and the chaos had accidentally saved them. Production finally wrapped in July 1962, over a year behind schedule. The final budget was over $31 million, the most expensive film ever made. Fox had spent more on Cleopatra than most studios spent in an entire year. The studio's future now depended entirely on the film's success. If it failed, Fox would be dismantled and sold for parts. If it succeeded, they might survive long enough to recover. The premiere was set for June 1963, 2 years after Elizabeth Taylor's surgery, 2 years after the scar that changed everything. Cleopatra premiered on June 12, 1963, at the Rivoli Theater in New York, 4 hours long. Spectacular, controversial, excessive. Critics were divided. Some called it a masterpiece. Others called it a bloated disaster. But audiences didn't care about critics. They came in massive numbers. The film grossed over $26 million in its initial release, enormous for the time. One of the highest-grossing films of the year, but because of the catastrophic budget, Fox barely broke even. The studio survived. Barely. Skouras was forced out. New management took over, and Fox began the slow, painful process of recovering from the Cleopatra nightmare. Elizabeth Taylor's performance earned mixed reviews, but her presence dominated every scene. The scar on her throat was visible in close-ups. Makeup couldn't fully hide it, and she didn't want to hide it. The scar was proof she had survived, proof she had fought, proof that sometimes the cost of making art is written on your body. The film earned her another Oscar nomination. She didn't win, but she had already won something more valuable. She had survived the thing that tried to kill her, and in doing so, she had unknowingly carried a studio through its darkest moment. People remember Cleopatra for spectacle, for scandal, for Elizabeth and Richard's forbidden love, for the costumes, the sets, the excess. But the real turning point happened in a hospital room on March 4, 1961. One surgery, one scar, one decision that forced a studio to gamble everything. Fox had built a trap for itself. They had invested too much to walk away, and when their star nearly died, they discovered their entire future was tied to her survival. Not because she agreed to it, not because she planned it, but because the studio had made itself dependent on one woman's heartbeat. She never agreed to save a studio. The studio simply tied its fate to her survival. And when the doctors cut into her throat that night, they didn't just save Elizabeth Taylor's life. They saved an empire that had gambled everything on her ability to keep breathing. That's the story Fox never tells. The night when medical scissors determined a corporation's fate. The night when one scar became the difference between bankruptcy and survival. The scar on Elizabeth's throat healed, but it never disappeared. For the rest of her life, photographers would capture it in close-ups. A small mark, a reminder, not of vanity or beauty, but of survival. That scar saved her life on March 4, 1961, and in the strangest twist of Hollywood history, it saved a studio too, because without that surgery, Elizabeth would have died. The insurance wouldn't have covered Fox's losses. The film would have died unfinished. The studio would have been liquidated by the end of the year. All because of one night, one infection, one decision to cut. Hollywood remembers Elizabeth Taylor as the woman who lived excessively, who loved dangerously, who broke rules and survived scandals. But in March 1961, she was just a woman fighting to breathe, and when she won that fight, she unknowingly carried an entire studio across the finish line with her.